If you have ever questioned whether it's safe to be yourself, to be powerful, creative, and ambitious, then this episode is for you. Meet Kyle Denman. He's the executive director of Arts Bridging the Gap, a Los Angeles nonprofit using the arts to empower underserved youth. And at the same time, he's an award-winning fashion designer with awards such as International Fashion Designer of the Year, a 30 under 30 changemaker in education, and Forbes 30 under 30 Los Angeles honoree. But what makes Kyle even more compelling, especially as an Asian American creative, is that he has never let himself be confined to one box. Educator, designer, nonprofit leader, Kyle embodies what it looks like to honor every part of yourself. And in so doing, he expands possibilities for all of us. Let's dive in. You're such an example of someone who just is not confined to a box. And I'll speak for myself. I'm someone who has always pursued the box and thought that the box was my only possibility and limited myself to that. I would love to hear from you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've known each other for a while. And as you know, I was adopted. I was born in Seoul, South Korea. And then I was adopted by a family in Cincinnati, Ohio. I think it's important to note that this family, while doing the best that they could and can do, there's always something that can be challenging related to transnational and trans ethnic adoptions. So growing up, I didn't really have any sort of idea of what being an Asian American or even just thinking about being Korean really meant. The first time I ever had
Mm.
Korean food was when I moved out to Los Angeles about 9 years ago.
Oh.
And so consistently growing up, I was just someone who looked different than everyone else.
Mm.
And for many, many years, I never knew why. And I never knew what that meant. I think in terms of what that meant socially and
Mm.
culturally, but I also think in terms of my own identity and the idea of creating possibilities. I didn't know what that meant and how powerful that would be in my future. So I grew up in Cincinnati, and I always loved art. My family said that I was drawing before I could talk, and I remember some of my earliest memories, my core memories of just taking a sketchbook and a pencil around everywhere I went and drawing. With that being said, whenever anyone would ask me, what do you want to be when you're older? And I would tell them I want to be an artist, people constantly said, well, you can't. And I think they said that for a few reasons. One, they automatically told me, well, you're not going to make enough money, right? This idea of a starving artist. Now, I think that's incredibly incorrect, right? Like in my life now, I want to transition this idea of a starving artist into a thriving artist. But I
Oh.
also think growing up, people consistently pointed to other artists that were famous and said, you know, how many of them look like you? And growing up with a very traditional
Yeah.
education in the Midwest, I could never give them an answer,
Oh. Yeah.
right? They constantly pointed to artists like Van Gogh
Yeah.
and Picasso and all these other people,
Absolutely.
and they sort of said, "Okay, well, there's your answer."
Mm.
I also think that wasn't necessarily other people's sole ignorance in saying, well, you can't be an artist because no one else who looks like you is an artist. I think there's so many social constructs in those conversations that I had, even as a child, of, well, you're Asian.
Yeah.
And for so many people, my existence in their communities was an anomaly. And so,
Mm.
what did these people automatically assume Asian Americans were going to be when they were older?
Yeah.
Were those very stereotypical careers of you're going to be a doctor, you're
Doctor.
going to be
Yeah.
an attorney, you're going to be an engineer.
Yeah.
And while I love law and politics, I was not good at math. I was just okay in science. I was like, I'm not going to be an engineer. I am not going to be a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I think that was in many ways my first introduction to people projecting their ideas of what I should be. onto me, even as a
Mm,
child.
yeah.
And this was something I experienced as an aggregate, right?
Yep.
The idea of, well, all Asians are good at math. I was I did not do well in my math
Same.
classes in high school at
Yeah.
all. And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I remember, getting my grades back and classmates saying, "Well, you're Asian though."
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's not how my brain works.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of how I grew up. It was always interesting growing up, not only in a community, but also in a family that didn't look like myself, because I think consistently I had the experience of being othered,
Mm,
which was both very isolating, but I think now as I've gotten older, I can see it as being very empowering because I think that also fueled my desire and my identity to consistently be different,
yeah.
in the best way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that so many of us in the Asian community can identify and connect to that feeling of feeling just othered inside of spaces. I can certainly recount when somebody projected their expectations onto me. What were some of those first boxes that you were put in? And when did you start to really recognize that, I don't really fit neatly inside of these projections that people are putting onto me as, the doctor, lawyer, or what have you?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I think some of those earliest boxes were the fact that people automatically assumed I would go into a career like engineering
Yeah.
or into the medical field.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes growing up and even now to this day, I also experience people putting me into a box of, well, you're Asian, so that means you're weak. That means you are in many ways subservient, that you
Hmm.
are willing to give in more easily, that you're willing to acquiesce.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not the case, I think, in the work that I do now and even growing up. I mentioned briefly that I liked law and politics. And when I was told by so many people that I wouldn't make it as an artist, I said, okay. Like, I immediately sort of believed them and said, well, I do like this other field. And I think some people were surprised because, I mean, I think this could be a whole other discussion, but ideally, attorneys and politicians and public officials are not seen as weak or being,
Oh,
people to acquiesce. And so
yeah.
that was something I really enjoyed doing. And I was involved in the local YMCA's Youth and City Government program. I became the youth mayor of Cincinnati when I was 16 years old. And then I advocated at state and national levels on policy and stuff that I wrote that I was very strongly for. And I think
Yeah.
so many people looked at that and said, oh, this little adopted Asian immigrant from the Midwest not only has a voice, but is willing to raise it. And I think people were very confused by that.
Incredible. So incredible. I mean, you're absolutely right. You cannot acquiesce and be subservient and be a politician or a youth mayor or somebody who really believes and pushes policy. That's how I know you even today. Could you talk a little bit about how your experience of being youth mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio, majoring in political science, how did that influence your career as an educator, as a leader, as a fashion designer today?
Yeah, well, I realized that everything, whether we want to believe it or not, is inherently political.
Mm,
Policy and politics and culture and religion and all of these things that are often at the forefront of so much dissonance really it can just be at the forefront of conversation and at the forefront of community building and identity building, a formation of communities also.
yeah.
So it was always really tricky for me for a very long time when I had told people that I was eventually going to go into the arts full time and in fashion design in particular.
Mm,
And I remember talking with one of my former professors from undergrad. I went to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, to study political science, and I was telling him like, oh, like yeah, I don't entirely know how my background in political science and all of this stuff that I've done for so many years relates. And his response was incredibly telling. He was like, well, how can you not see how they relate?
Mm.
Politics and political science is the way people communicate. It's the study of people, and so
Mm.
is fashion.
Wow.
And that immediately made my brain sort of recalibrate and think he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Everything that I have been doing up until the point when I moved out to Los Angeles to pursue fashion and a career in the arts was really building myself up because, like I said, policy and politics and all of these things are such strong dynamics within the fashion industry, both in
Mm.
terms of the actual politics of fashion, but also the way that fashion is formed and matured and realized. Um, it was really interesting to see how those experiences
Yeah.
built upon each other in that lens, but also in terms of, this idea of creating and evolving my own durable skills, my transferable skills. It allowed me to best communicate my own voice. And it also allowed me to recognize that there are so many voices to be recognized
Mm.
within the arts, within education, and that there is intersection there
Absolutely.
that inherently exists that so many people might not realize at first.
Yeah.
So it's been incredible. Even to this day, I was talking with a young student of mine who's a senior in high school earlier this week about what I did in the past. And I showed her a picture of me at the Conference on National Affairs in 2013. The YMCA Youth Conference on National Affairs, all of the delegates who represent each of their states. That year, there were three delegates that represented Ohio, and that was my third year attending the conference. Had to write a proposal that was controversial inherently, in whatever way, that would be debated
Mm.
through multiple iterations, through multiple rounds, and then eventually voted on if it passed into the final session. I was the second person, I believe, in history from Ohio to make it to the final round. I named it Daniel's proposal after a friend who has Down syndrome. So the proposal passed in the plenary session. And then that year, I got this really big extinction to come back the following year to help lead the conference. So it's like the top six sort of delegates in the country. And again, I was the second person from Ohio to receive it. And again, to think like, this kid from the Midwest, from Cincinnati, who just wanted to be an artist, had the opportunity to raise his voice in a way that was conducive, that was heard, that was felt, and that was safe for him to speak, was really impactful for me. And I will say this for anyone who is
Yeah.
listening to this, especially because I'm still very close friends with those same people from the Conference on National Affairs. They
Okay.
created a safe space where a kid like me could raise his voice and could speak and wouldn't just be heard, but would be listened to
Yeah.
in a safe way. So that was incredibly formative because I then knew even if these spaces are not all safe for someone to speak, how do we co-create them?
How do we co-create them?
And sometimes it takes that initial step of saying there is a person that wants to begin co-creating that. And that's what then brought me into, after having a degree in political science and doing some of that work for a few years, jumping into fashion
Mm.
and education.
Yes.
That was when I moved to Los Angeles about 9 years ago.
First of all, I cannot believe you did that all as a high school student. Oh my gosh. Could you tell us a little bit about your work with Arts Bridging the Gap, as well as your work as an award-winning fashion designer? And let me just tee this up. I really see it like this intersection of all these different
Absolutely.
interests. When you were just
Absolutely.
talking about political science, using your voice, I mean, it's all embodied into these two huge roles that you currently carry.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for saying that and for prefacing all of this. So, being the executive director of Arts Bridging the Gap is a huge honor. When I was looking for a job after I was ending my time as a full-time educator,
Mhm.
I was really surprised to find this role online. I just was looking for jobs on LinkedIn and
Mm.
I didn't necessarily know if I was qualified for the position, but I said, I want to try anyway. It looks great. I can't believe an organization like this exists.
Mm.
And I threw my hat in the ring. And then a few months later, after 4 rounds of interviews, I was hired. But ABG's mission is to uplift the voices, experiences, and self-expressions of young people from under-resourced communities through healing arts programs.
Wow.
It's incredible to know that ABG's influence is all across Los Angeles County with as small of a team and as small of a budget as we have.
Yeah.
But every year we're impacting over 5,000 young people. We just got our first feature in the New York Times that came out last week, and people are starting to recognize how important the work is that we are doing.
Yeah.
From, for those who are familiar with Los Angeles County, we are all the way up north in Antelope Valley, all the way south to South LA and Compton and Long Beach, all the way east from Claremont, which I didn't even realize was still in LA County.
LA
It's
County, yeah.
far.
Neither did
It's
I.
literally on the border, all the
Wow.
way to Santa Monica and Venice. And if you can imagine the most frequently overlooked young people, and those numbers change all the time, and I'm glad, right? And what I love about ABG is that we are supporting so many young people across LA County through the same things that really got me going when I was a kid,
Mm,
the arts.
yeah.
But I was not necessarily a performer or a musician or anything of that nature growing up. But ABG, we have visual arts, performing arts, musical arts, rhythmic arts, which is dance. We have gardening arts, digital art and virtual reality, textile arts, culinary arts, poetic arts, cinematic arts, you name it.
So
Because
much.
we know that every child, again, learns differently. When a child has access to the arts, they are also 4 times more likely to pursue post-high school education. When a child has access to the arts, they feel more in tune with themselves, both physically and mentally and emotionally. When a child has access to the arts, they feel more a part of a community. They're able to enter flow state. But what ABG is so known for is that we are not only creating art on a micro level, but we are creating art on a macro and community level. Through our visual arts program, the culminating projects typically are a public mural. We painted 123 public murals across Los Angeles County. We painted the largest Black Lives Matter movement mural in the United States. We brought kids on board to that. We have a performing arts program. We put on musicals every single season. We are now about to start building our eighth urban farm in Los Angeles.
What?
Yeah, which is
So
incredible.
cool.
It's so, again, involved thinking about how we do this from a political and
Yeah.
social perspective, but also
Yeah.
an educational perspective and a holistic perspective with kids. But to be able to create urban farms in neighborhoods that don't normally have access or typically have access to green space or to healthy produce, it's huge. These are not food deserts because deserts insinuate that these are naturally occurring spaces without healthy foods or green space. No, this is food apartheid. I would say specifically on communities of color. And if we can bring in raised beds and hydroponic systems where youth and their families are not only learning the science of food growth, but then they're learning the science of hydroponics and
Mm,
all of that and solar power.
so cool.
We're opening up their worlds and their minds to so much more. We are also creating opportunity for them to heal not only as individuals, but as a collective, as a community.
Mm,
And that's the work that's really powerful with ABG is
yeah.
that we are a community-based organization that is
Mm,
here for our youth in their communities.
yeah. Yeah.
And even though we're doing all this work, we're still a very small team. I'm still the only full-time employee, and I
Can
just
you
have
believe that, everyone?
amazing, yeah.
Like
Um,
the numbers that the stats that you just cited, Kyle, it's insane to me that you're the only full-time employee.
the reason why we're able to do this is because we have such a beautiful team, and constantly we are getting applications from artists, not only across LA or Southern California, but we've gotten applications from artists all around the world to join
Wow.
ABG's team of artists. Right now, we have about 35 artists in residence, and then we have about 70 visiting artists who lead programs. Our artists in residence are our main artists who work with us pretty much on a regular, consistent basis.
Okay.
And what I love is that part of ABG's mission in so many ways is to expand the creative economy, yes, for our youth, but how do we do that? It's by also uplifting people, the artists who look
Yes.
like them, who
Yes.
come from their same backgrounds and their
Yes.
same communities. So
Yes.
that way, the young people that we're working with on a daily basis get to say, well, that artist grew up in Boyle Heights like me. Like they grew up on my street. That is something so important to see and to demonstrate and to hold space for is for artists to be models of possibility for all of our young people.
And may I also add, like, not only are they incredible models of possibility, but you actually pay the artists. So you're talking about uplifting like communities.
Absolutely.
These are not volunteers,
No,
everyone.
they are not. The last time I checked, a teaching artist is typically paid about $45 per teaching session of about an hour. We pay starting rate at $100. And again, it's to expand what that creative economy looks like, not only for our artists and residents, but then for our young people.
Yeah.
It means a lot to know that ABG really is at the forefront of really changing the game for not only professional artists, but for young artists that we're working with, those 5,000 kids we're working with on a daily basis. There's something really special about the work we're doing, and I wish ABG
Absolutely.
existed
Yeah.
or was around when I was growing up because it would have been beautiful to say, hey, everyone around me, look,
Yeah.
there's an artist that is actually Korean, and
Yeah.
we have a Korean artist on our team who makes quite a bit of money and enjoys what they're doing, and they have a whole community behind
Yeah,
them.
it's really incredible. When I hear you, first of all, you're so on fire right now, Kyle, like just talking about
Thank
the
you.
organization and about the impact that it's having. And I can just feel it on this side of the screen, first of all. The second thing, as I'm listening to you, are giving students the opportunity to leverage and build up their voice and express it in so many different creative outlets. It's really
Absolutely.
remarkable. I also hear you doing that for your community of artists in residence and all of the artists that you work with. You are also giving them an opportunity to leverage their voice. That would not be possible if the person at the top wasn't grounded in, like, I am going to use my voice. I'm going to use it as a force for good, and it's going to have an impact across all of these different communities. I'm just thinking about the person who's sitting and listening or watching at home. How did you develop such a powerful, convicted, grounded in like impact? Like, I'm having this social impact, I'm going to have a political impact, I'm going to share it with the people who are right next to me, I'm going to build them up and bring them along. Has there ever been a moment where you felt like you had to shrink or stay small? Because I'm just thinking maybe there's somebody listening who has also felt that way, but they're like, dang it, I want a voice like Kyle.
Oh, thank you. One thing I'll say in terms of my leadership style is
Yeah.
I'm very lucky that ABG was founded almost 11 years ago now. And what was so special is that our founder, Georgia Van Kylenberg, really had a special mission of, again, wanting to uplift all young people through the arts. And they had been looking for a successor for her for a while.
Mhm.
And I was one of the last people to interview. Again, I sort of just checked it out on LinkedIn and I was like, how does something like this exist? Let me apply and see what happens. And I think this is very telling about the type of person she is and the community that she had already created, is that what separated me from other applicants, I was told, was one of the things I said is I want to lead with love. And I
Mhm.
really do. I'm very protective of our youth. I'm very protective of my artists. I will always go to bat for them, and they have the biggest hearts. And I think what has allowed me to really have that mindset is, yes, I was in political science, but I was also in education. I started teaching art and design to youth, the youth that you know, Lindsay, and
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
how we met. And I saw them come to life.
Yeah.
Students who were gang affiliated or who might have been systems involved who were not coming to school, they started showing up twice a week when I was at their campus to teach fashion and art. So how can we leverage that?
Yeah.
Okay, if you come to school on these 2 days for art class, how about you come in on Wednesdays? And I'll start coming in on Wednesdays too, and at lunch we could have a special class. To see that a child is able to really grow into the best version of themselves through the arts through, I think, the lenses of knowing that they feel supported by an educator, by a trusted adult. So that's really what has allowed me, I think, to stay as dedicated as possible in a world that is very hard.
Yeah.
I also think that's what's very important in thinking about this idea of maybe shrinking ourselves down is I definitely have had to shrink myself down or felt
Mm.
like I've had to shrink myself down. But in many ways, I also have recognized that that can be synonymous with, being soft in a
Yeah.
world, like I said, that is very, very hard.
Yes.
And I've also realized like that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes shrinking ourselves down, if you do it intentionally, means that you can fit into smaller spaces. You
Yeah.
can fit around the corners and that you can adapt. I think being soft means that you can be malleable and adaptable to situations, but also being sensitive and
Yeah.
being empathetic.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to sort of the meat and potatoes of that question. I definitely think I've had to shrink down. And again, I think shrinking for my own sake is different than shrinking for someone else. But I definitely felt as if I have had to shrink for other people. And I think part of that comes from my identity as, the intersection of being Asian,
Yeah.
being adopted, being gay. I think again, there are all of these identities that intersect together of saying, well, he'll acquiesce or he'll shrink himself down and it'll be fine because that's what I think so many of these identities are used to being forced to do,
Yeah.
whether historically or culturally or socially. And it's definitely challenging because I have seen myself having to shrink myself or feeling the need to shrink myself down in education,
Mm-hmm.
policy, and in
Mm-hmm.
the arts because I've wanted to make sure that, again, being small, I can fit in the mold.
For sure.
But I think that
Yeah.
also gives then people room when they do shrink down to sort of then expand and break that mold and make sure that that mold is so broken that has been created by I think of like an ice cube tray of
Yes.
that ice cube tray is broken so much where no one else can fit into that mold anymore because it doesn't exist.
Mm.
And that way we have to figure out how to continue
Yeah.
to expand. I have found it important for me to be able to adapt, but also to, again, to remain sensitive and soft in a world that is very hard, especially
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want and I really appreciate you being so vulnerable about that, and speaking to it's hard sometimes. And I know also for anyone listening, sometimes we do have to shrink to also keep ourselves safe. That has certainly been my reality sometimes, just for safety's sake. But you talked about how you lead with love. And as someone who has known you for the last couple of years, you are the true embodiment of leading with love, with kindness, with generosity, compassion, empathy. I'm curious to know because you also referenced like this is a difficult world. And I want to play devil's advocate with you, Kyle. Like and actually you spoke to this as well. It is not easy to lead with love and kindness. Like that's not a popular in some spaces that's could not be a popular leadership model. I'm curious to know for somebody who is looking to stretch or break that mold and to embody the type of leadership, whether it's, they want to lead with love, or if you want to, really lead with compassion, or you want to lead with courage, or however you define leadership. How do you deal with, I imagine, the disappointment and the heartbreak of being underestimated or not being fully seen in a space, having to
Absolutely.
shrink down? Like, how do I deal with that?
Yeah, so I guess to even add a further layer in terms
Yeah.
of sort of the nonprofit space, when I was hired to be executive director of ABG, I was 27, and now I had just turned 30. And when I think oftentimes people meet me and my team, I have a very young team overall, in terms of a median age range. I think people underestimate us because first off, again, they look at all of us and they look at me and they're like, oh, this Asian, gay, and then they're like, kid, essentially. They're like, how is
Uh-huh.
this kid leading an organization?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes that comes into play in terms of that aspect of my life professionally. But then I think they see sort of the people who are standing around me and they're like, oh, this is a very young group overall. And oh, there's a lot of people of color. There's a lot of women. Like there's a lot of people who identify as being part of the LGBTQIA community or people with disabilities. And they're like, how does an organization like this like kind of stand on their own feet? Because they're, I think again, by society's perspectives, people then look at us and they say, this is a kind of a group of weak people.
Yeah.
And they're all artists, so they're all over the place,
Yeah. Yeah.
creatively and, mentally and organizationally. So for me, it's been really tough sometimes to maintain a positive outlook. But what I've been able to do, thankfully, is I've been able to find people who really believe in the work that I do. My whole mission, I would say as an artist, but I think my mission just as a person is to ignite a culture of change through creativity and curiosity and through radical acts of humanizing the human experience.
Mm.
And what does that really mean? I think in terms of ABG, the humanizing the human experience is allowing everyone, no matter the age, to bring out their inner child. Because when we're kids, that's when there is less judgment, that's when there is less fear, that's when
Mm.
there's more creativity, more inspiration, and more empathy.
Yeah.
So, how do we create a culture surrounding that? And how do we create spaces that enable that? I think, in terms of my artistry, humanizing the human experience is first and foremost telling these stories of the human experience and a platform that can exist on international stages where people are forced to listen.
Mm.
And they're forced to
Mm.
recognize of how significant they are,
Yeah.
right? With a mural, those stories that these kids are telling and creating are literally on a wall that cannot be erased.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I, create art on a runway or working with celebrities for big performances, it is done so in a way where people are forced to recognize that this is here and it is taking up space.
Mm.
So I think that's another thing that's really important is no matter how small we are forced to make ourselves out to be, we have to recognize that even the smallest amount of space is still space that we are taking up.
Ooh, I
And that
love
is
that.
so
Yeah.
important. And that way we
Yeah.
can consistently grow and expand and evolve to the point where, okay, we're, maybe starting in this little corner, but we are now expanding and taking up more and more space because
Yeah.
we know that we deserve it. And people have recognized, right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
a plant that has grown in the corner of a garden was taking that space and it is surviving. And
Yeah.
clearly as it evolves and takes up more space, it's not just, um, it's not just really surviving, it is thriving, it is growing, and it is expanding to the point where the pod is going to break, and we
Wow.
need to create a better space for it.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that
So,
visual. That just made it so concrete for me. And I never thought about that. It's true. Like, even if it's not the space that maybe I thought I wanted or and maybe even ready for, it's still space. And sometimes it just takes time to grow. Kyle, today we're talking about, of course, creating our own spaces, creating, not being confined to a box that somebody projects or creates for us, but to actually do that on our own accord. You are certainly the shining example of that. And I want to get to your work in fashion. You talked about part of your person mission is to humanize the human experience.
yeah.
And we've been talking about intersectionality and how, your work at ABG, your work as an educator, as a speaker, as a creative, like it all, you pull from so many different areas. Could you tell us a little bit about your work as a fashion designer? And can you just tell us also, I'm just thinking about the person who's sitting and listening or watching, you know, how do you manage all of this?
Yeah, so I'll start with the managing my time. First off,
Yeah.
it's hard. I'll be
Okay.
honest, very,
Okay.
very
Thanks for
frank. I'll be
keeping it
very
real for
honest.
us. Yes.
It's tough, especially right now as I'm preparing for a big production. Um, but what I love is that every single thing I'm doing, I'm incredibly passionate about, and there is overlap. There is that way of being able to tangibly tie everything together in really meaningful ways. I'm also very grateful that with ABG, because we're an artist-run organization, all of our team members are allowed to take time to create on their own.
Mm.
And what I even it's kind of ironic being in this leadership role, in the title of an executive director, I actually have never felt more of a more balanced work life, of a more balanced like work life relationship ever,
Wow.
which I think is very ironic that
Yeah.
normally you would think that it would be very much skewed towards work,
Yeah.
but I'm allowed to give space to my craft, and people respect that at ABG, and I love that. And that is again a culture that I think I have been able to support in facilitating, that Georgia created, and that we as a community are all really cultivating. An example is maybe an artist on our team might not be available, and that's totally fine. And that's celebrated, and that's recognized, and that's valued. But it is hard. But it is incredibly rewarding to know that I get to do what I love to do, both artistically, but also professionally, which
Mm.
then both fuel me personally.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
very, very fortunate that I just, and that's how I really manage my time is that I could just
Okay.
do everything I love to do. Like work is fun. In terms of storytelling on the runway, I am known for creating often maybe controversial or provocative stories on the runway. Um, at Los Angeles Fashion Week, I worked with models who have disabilities and we're all different sizes. And yeah, that's not seen very often. And that was a collection called If I Had a Flower, named after the quote by Albert Tennyson. If I had a flower for every time I thought of you, I could walk through my garden forever. And it was about this idea of remaining soft in a world that is hard, just like a flower being able to survive in a world that is not kind
Mm.
to it. My collection for New York Fashion Week, which earned me the title of International Designer of the Year, was called Multipolar Existence and was inspired by the interconnectivity and the multidimensionality of the human experience, this idea of soulmates always finding a way. So often, what I do is I try and tell stories that, at their very core, are very easy to understand because every single person can experience this idea of whether it be of trying to be soft and sensitive in a world that is very challenging and rigid, to this idea of relationships and this idea of soulmates and love, and maybe even to forbidden love, which is my next collection called Judas 8 2. And that's what is premiering and debuting in Milan during Milan Fashion Week. And it's inspired by the queer tragedy of Jesus and Judas. And again, it's this almost like hypocritical contrast. It's a story and a relationship that I think so many people can understand and can feel, but then it's through a different lens that is often seen as a little bit more provocative.
Mm.
What I love to do is telling these stories of humanizing the human experience
Mm.
through these deeply provocative ways. My goal is to share a story, is to
Mm.
create a space where we are creating an environment together. We are co-creating that environment together. The audience, the models, the production, myself. It is an experience, and that's what I think a runway show can be in the most beautiful way.
My gosh, thank you for sharing all of that. Kyle, what I've learned from you today is you've had some incredible formative experiences that has really developed and anchored your voice, and you have explicitly sought out community spaces that really
Yes.
celebrate and allow you to grow that voice. And in turn, you create community for others, for us, to really experience, develop, cultivate, and share our voice as well. So for that, I'm so grateful for the wisdom that you have shared. My last question as we wrap up this discussion is for the person who is listening who might be struggling to pursue themselves, succumbing to other people's expectations, do you have any advice for that person?
I'd say there's a couple of things. One is find your people. That it really, I think that is such a game-changing thing. I'll be honest, I even for Milan Fashion Week have had so many struggles with logistics and this and that and emotionally of, oh, can I do this? Should I do this?
Mm.
People are going to judge me. Some of the people who have stepped up the most are people I wouldn't have expected. I have several of my friends and people who I know who have just said, "Well, why wouldn't we come to support you? Why wouldn't we do our best to make this opportunity happen?"
Mm.
And that meant a lot to know that people have been in my corner. And maybe I'm not always looking in their direction all the time.
Mm.
And so that's my advice, is to find your people. And my second piece of advice is, and this is something I always tell my students whenever I'm working with them, is that Recognize your own cheetah spots. I am a big fan of the Cheetah Girls from Disney Channel. They were really popular in the early 2000s. They are my heroes. I love their music. I love their movies, but I also love what they represent. They're actually all four women of color, and it's amazing who come together to create a music group. I always tell my students, find your cheetah spots
Mm,
because every cheetah spots are different and they're unique and they're special. And cheetahs themselves as animals are independent. But from a biological standpoint, when they need support, they regroup and they help each other out.
wow.
So recognize how important your cheetah spots are, how individual they are, and recognize that maybe behind a tree in the savannah, you have some other cheetahs waiting to jump on in and support you when you need.
Wow. Folks, this was a master class in how to be authentically who you are. And Kyle, for that, I'm so grateful to you. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Courage Class. I hope today's conversation gave you a little encouragement and inspiration. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And for extra motivation, tools, and behind the scenes content, sign up for my newsletter. I'd love to share with you more there. See you next time.